land acknowledgement. The PSBA is committed to diversity, inclusion, and equity work. As an organization based in Tacoma, Washington, we acknowledge the Puyallup tribe and invite you to visit the official website of the Puyallup and listen to their land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional homelands of the Puyallup tribe. The Puyallup people have lived on and stewarded these lands since the beginning of time and continue to do so today. We recognize that this land acknowledgement is one small step toward true allyship, and we commit to uplifting the voices, experiences, and histories of the indigenous people of this land and beyond.
Thank you so much, Lori, and welcome everyone. I can't believe it is almost the end of August and we're resuming our fall series of Zoom conversations. Suzanne Moore and I are very, very happy to see all of you here in the Zoom room and so pleased to have Allie Alvis back. Before we start, however, I do want to share that Puget Sound Book Artists is continuing to be committed to making these sessions open and accessible to everyone, not just our members. But we do want to acknowledge and thank our many PSBA members for their continued support. And if you are not yet a member of PSBA, Lori has dropped our membership form as well as a donate link into the chat. And we'd like to encourage you to continue to support our sessions because this program has just been so great and meaningful. So thank you all. And I also want to say that we have back-to-back Zooms this fall. Next week, we will be welcoming the well-known paper marveler Pietro Arcandre to talk about his use of color and design. October 23rd, we're welcoming Karen Kunk from the Midwest, and to conclude our fall series in November with our local artist, Randy Parkhurst. And you can register for all of these sessions by visiting our calendar. So sign up now, sign up early. So on to our program. Many of you will remember Allie's outstanding presentation just about a year ago when they introduced us to the very special collections at the Winterthur Library. In the role as curator of special collections, Allie has introduced literally thousands to the wonders of rare books. And if you don't already follow Allie on Instagram, be sure to connect to Book Historia. It's one of my favorite sites. Now, Allie was just in the process of opening up an incredible color show, and Suzanne Moore, when she heard Allie's talk, said, "We've got to invite her back." So Suzanne, take it away.
Yeah, and that presentation was a wonderful glimpse of your collection, but when you were showing things and your spectrum colored nails showed up, I thought, oh my God, we got to know more about this color exhibition. So from a curatorial background is so interesting, I think, to see what people choose to put together. And we're so grateful that you could come again and speak from that perspective. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be back. Kind of like last time, I will start with a brief PowerPoint, and then I'll move into showing you cool stuff. So this is a shot of one of the cases of the color exhibit. I wish that I could give you like a VR view of all of these amazing objects. I'm only going to be able to show you, like I said, a little snippet of the things that were in that exhibition. But it was really, really fun to make. I'll talk a little bit more about process after I do my little introduction. As curator of special collections at the Winterthur Library, I have the unique joy of both buying cool new stuff for the collection and using the collection to engage all sorts of audiences. One such audience that we have been particularly focused on in recent years is artists across every media, particularly through our Maker Creator Fellowship that runs every year, which I will say more about at the end of this presentation. But the short version is you can come to Winterthur and be inspired by this stuff and make art and get paid for it. So here is all 3 cases of the color exhibition. I crammed as much in there as I could. I also did the graphic design, which was really fun. This is kind of a whistle-stop tour of an exhibition I curated last year called That Pleasing Art, Color in Theory and Practice. Color permeates our lives, reflecting in ponds and puddles, illuminating our clothes, glowing through our computer screens. Companies like Pantone tell us the color of the year, and we dye our hair vibrant, biologically impossible shades. But our colorful world should not be taken for granted. Scientists have agonized over classifying and standardizing colors to understand the natural world. And developments in printing and manufacturing technology have made it possible to always have the rainbow at our fingertips. That Pleasing Art told the story of color through the collections of the Winterthur Library, from the earliest color chart to mid-century interior decorating advice and beyond. But what is the Winterthur Library? And how did we wind up with all of these works relating to color, along with over a million other items spanning 5 centuries? This presentation is going to be primarily show and tell based, I promise. But before I get to the stuff, I just want to give you a teeny bit of context. And this will be familiar to those of you who attended my previous presentation. But it's a good refresher because Winterthur is weird. So what Terter? Winterthur is the premier museum of American decorative arts. Its unparalleled collection of nearly 90,000 objects displayed in a magnificent 175-room house. Winterthur is also 1,000 acres of protected meadows, woodlands, ponds, and waterways, with 60 acres of maintained garden. And finally, Winterthur is a library. The Winterthur Library is an internationally renowned independent academic research library dedicated to documenting, understanding, and engaging the artistic, cultural, social, and intellectual history of the Americas in a global context from the 15th to the 20th centuries. So, big job. Winterthur. Winterthur was established as a museum, garden, and library by Henry Francis DuPont, who you can see here. This photo doesn't capture the glory of his eyebrows. This man had big, bushy eyebrows. I encourage you, if you ever get to Winterthur, to look at his many portraits and admire his, his brow. So it was established by Henry Francis DuPont, who was the final private occupant of the house that now forms the bulk of the museum. The DuPont family is famous for their eponymous company, founded in 1802 by Eliezer Irénée DuPont, otherwise known as E.I. DuPont for pronunciation easy. E.I. established the outfit to develop land and produce gunpowder, and later generations shifted its focus to chemistry and the automotive world. Unlike some more of his more industrially minded family members, Henry found himself drawn more towards agriculture, horticulture, and American material history, and he had the generational wealth and resources to create the collection of his dreams. He became one of the leading figures in the history of American decorative arts, and even helmed the First Lady's Fine Arts Committee, which oversaw restoration of the White House in 1961. Winterthur. As HF's collections grew, he began to open up his home to fellow collectors, as well as people who wanted to research the history of American decorative arts. In 1951, he converted the main house on the Winterthur grounds, which you can see here, into a full-time public museum, and moved to a smaller home on the property called The Cottage. Small is subjective here. I think it has something like 7 bedrooms. So compared to his 175-room house, I guess this was quite a downgrade. But for most of us, that's still quite a house. In 1952, HF established a joint master's degree program in American material culture with the University of Delaware, with the help of curator Charles F. Montgomery. The Winterthur Library was established that same year in 1952, with the heart of the collection expanded and curated by Frank Summer, the first Winterthur librarian. Henry Francis DuPont passed away in 1969. Where is Winterthur? It is located just outside Wilmington, Delaware, on a plot of land that has been owned by the DuPont family since 1811. The main house was constructed between 1839 and 1842 at the behest of Jacques-Antoine Bitterman, who was E.I. DuPont's business partner and husband of Evelina Gabrielle DuPont. Bitterman named the estate Winterthur after his ancestral home in Switzerland. Winterthur is both part of the city of Wilmington and its own community. Some members of staff actually still reside on the grounds, and we even have our own zip code and post office. Winterthur. The library's roots go back to Pierre Samuel DuPont, the progenitor of the American DuPonts, who brought a large portion of his library with him when he emigrated from France to the US in the 18th century. But the Winterthur Library's strengths today are due in large part to Henry Francis DuPont and his vision for advanced study in the decorative arts. H.F. DuPont was not a big book collector. He was very interested in American decorative arts and decorative arts objects. He did collect books, some, mostly as set dressing for the rest of the house. So he was very focused on American books for sort of American environments. But he was very forward-thinking in understanding the importance of books to study. He just didn't collect them himself. As he was establishing the University of Delaware master's degree in material culture and connoisseurship, he realized that Winterthur needed a library to support this advanced study. Frank Summer took up DuPont's aims in establishing this library in the 1950s, working with Charles Montgomery. And it has resulted in what is today recognized as one of the strongest collections for the study of American decorative arts, material culture, and everyday life in America from the 1600s to the mid-20th century. You can see, I'm not sure if this is the first class of the material culture degree, but it is a very early class in the material culture degree. And you can see these bespectacled, betied men gazing upon rare books, not using book support wedges, which drives librarians insane. And we're glad that these have survived to be used by future generations, given that they were handled like this in the 1950s. But let's rewind a tiny bit. In 1951, Frank Summer was a 28-year-old newly minted professor establishing himself at the University of Delaware, boasting degrees in archaeology from Yale and Cambridge. It was there that he caught the eye of Charles F. Montgomery, who was then Winterthur's associate curator and executive secretary. This is an image of Memorial Library in the house. This was established as H.F. DuPont and his father's personal reading library. The books within it have moved around a number of times. We have most of them in our special collections now. But this is the kind of space that Montgomery was working with and that Summer came into. Initially, the library was kind of in a weird little corner of the house, and now it was built into the research building, which we are in now. I say we, me, but which you can kind of see behind me. This is a purpose-built space for the library, so we didn't have to cram a million books into this one little room or two weird little nooks and crannies of the museum. So this is Frank Summer at a later date. Montgomery was simultaneously engaged in opening Winterthur as a public museum and in building the graduate program with Delaware. So he tapped Summer to help expand the Winterthur's book collection to one benefiting the research needs of master students. Summer became Montgomery's book hound, spending the summer of 1952 in Europe, purchasing high points of decorative arts at post-World War II bargain basement prices. In an August 1952 letter to Montgomery, Summer remarked that he was deliciously wallowing in books, books, books. The course next term should be a humdinger if I can do my materials justice. After several weeks of frantic letters back and forth across the Atlantic granting Summer permission to purchase some title or another, Montgomery, with HF's support, granted Summer the equivalent of a blank check, this wire stating that he could purchase books to his heart's desire. So this reads, "This is an authorization for you to order any books you deem essential for university library, asking dealers to bill and ship same to museum." So this is really like, Frank, do whatever, send us a bill, which that's the dream. I wish we could still do that. So Frank Summer laid this wonderful library foundation, thinking about books in really interesting ways. He did not just buy the high points of decorative arts. He bought sort of the whole context of what these books existed in. Frank Summer's background was actually in archaeology, which kind of explains why he was buying the stuff that he was buying. If you imagine, the people excavating King Tut's tomb, and they come across that beautiful death mask, but they're like, I don't care about all that other stuff. I just want this symbol of what this man was. So Frank Summer is very focused on not just the central subject, but in all of these little things that support it and give it more meaning. That includes things like trade catalogs, ephemera, manuscript account books of unnamed craftspeople from America and from England, understanding who the customers were, what they were buying, what the stuff they were buying looked like. That all really contributes to the understanding of the everyday lives of Americans. And I, as curator, get to continue that tradition in part through buying things like this, which I bought, I think, in December of 2023, which was fairly early in my tenure here. And at the time, I thought, like, wow, what an incredible sales sample book. These are check glass buttons. And I just thought I loved the way the colors were arranged. And it's just very pleasing to the eye. It's not just a sales tool. It's very sort of satisfying and kind of speaks to color organization. And it actually fit really well in my exhibition. I can't say that that was the inspiration for the exhibition, but it worked out really well. So the color exhibition was a little bit of oh God, our curator has dropped out of the exhibition that we were going to have starting in September. Allie, can you whip something up? And I said, sure, let's go. And like I said, thinking of that button trade catalog of some of the wonderful, colorful things that I had seen just throughout the collection, I thought I could do an exhibit on color. So I did. So starting with the earliest object in the exhibition, I'm just scooting over so I don't have to reach across the table to turn pages here. I'm kind of going to move as though we were standing in front of the cases of the exhibition, starting from the far left, moving to the far right, and beginning with really understanding how we perceive and organize colors. Why do we organize them the way they do? And how does this affect artistic practice? This item is by Richard Waller. It looks very boring on the outset. It is called A Catalog of Simple and Mixed Colors with a specimen of each color prefixed to its proper name by R. Waller, Fellow of the Royal Society. So this is the first Western color chart. This was published in a periodical in 1686. And fix that up so it's straight. Here we go. It has this grid with little color dots on it. All of these dots were applied by hand. This is not color printed. This is 1686, and they simply did not have this kind of color printing technology. So color charts originated during the Enlightenment of the 17th century. This 1686 date is getting really nicely into the Enlightenment. There were all sorts of scientific publications like this, theorizing on different organizations of different parts of science, and one of those was color. Richard Waller, he was the son of the painter Mary Moore, and he created this color chart in 1686. It was part of an article for the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society, and you saw the title earlier, A Catalog of Simple and Mixed Colors. And this publication embodied Waller's broader philosophy of using tables and illustrations in scientific publications in order to make them more accessible. So he's not saying like, okay, read this and you'll understand what color is. He is actually not just telling, he is showing. And this really drove forward popular science in the 17th century. It was not just confined to universities and professors anymore. This is written in English. It's not written in Latin, as was the traditional science publication. So this is accessible to anybody who can read. Waller was a fixture in the social circles of the 17th century scientific and literary movers and shakers. Some of the other folks in these circles included Isaac Newton, Robert Hooke, and Samuel Pepys, who you can see his name here. A very famous diarist and sort of all-around interesting guy. He was president of the Royal Society when Waller's catalog was published. His name appears on the facing page. Waller's visual organization of colors forms the foundation of how we think about color. In writing this piece, Waller cites an earlier, I think it was a Dutch color chart that he saw that he based this on, but nobody knows what color chart that was. We're not sure if it was a manuscript thing or a printed thing. So there are still mysteries to be found in the history of color. I will just fold this back up. Next up, we have Louis Prang, Suggestions for Instruction in Color. So this sort of humble looking book is what it says on the tin. It is suggestions for childhood education of color instruction. And what is the most fun about this book is not, again, this is not just writing about color and, you know, the study of color harmony, understanding how all of these things are organized. There are also samples in here, which are just delightful. I found this when I was looking for something else in the stacks, and I just was flipping through it really quick and came across this, and it's so gorgeous. Some of you might know Prang as a pioneer of chromolithography in America, or a purveyor of art supplies, or maybe both. But Prang was also passionate about art education. So this is just one of many Prang publications on art education. He really emphasized not just the sort of classical understanding of color, but of play and just sort of messing around with color and with shapes. So children begin to understand how all of these bits and bobs work together, that it's not just a certain formula makes certain colors, but these things can be visually pleasing. You might not like some of these things. He suggests works to be done in colored paper. This was published in 1893, and it was built on the idea of the quote unquote ideal color unit and the investigation of the color perception of the child. And here's another one of these color charts. These are actually individual pieces of paper laid over one another. I think they were sort of die cut and then laid in like this. Prang actually co-authored color instruction with a woman named Mary Dana Hicks, who was an influential art educator who pioneered this teaching structure in Boston public schools for 2 years. Hicks served as the educational advisor to the Prang Company since 1878, and she advocated for the idea that art should be taught to children to foster their creative expression rather than as a skill to be graded. So again, it's part of that messing around with color. It's not just memorize these things and recite them. So here's another little, the 24 colors of the color unit. So the key part of Prang's color course here is that he also sold little colored chips and the colored paper that he encouraged students to use and colored charts. So this is not just a sort of wonderful educational resource. This is kind of a catalog because he's saying, like, if you use this tool, you can help do this or that. Like these colored paper things. You can buy these colored papers from Prang. Prang also produced these really interesting sequential sort of production documents for chromolithography, which I'm going to talk more about chromolithography later. But it shows how complex 19th century color printing could be. It draws on color theory of that if you combine two colors, you get a different color. And if you combine a third color into that color, you get yet another color. So it's this sort of exponential growth of different colors that you can get from just a few colors. It is the sort of basis for CMYK printing that we are familiar with now. So I will move on to the next guy. So this is part of case 2, which is all about standardizing and duplicating colors. Is my cerulean blue your cerulean blue? And is that the same cerulean that rolls off the printing press? These items speak to the importance of standardizing how we talk about color and how technology advances made printed paper vibrant. So this is a nomenclature of colors, hues, tints, and shades. A number of these books were published in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, really trying to nail down what these colors were called, how they were made, how they work together, and how they can be used in different environments. So this is by a man named David Ramsay Hay, whose color theory informed his interior design practice. He was specifically concerned with resolving quote unquote popular color names into measurable mixes of colors. So his book is primarily these triangular color charts. In the beginning, he kind of goes through his rationale, describes the proportions of different ingredients that should go into these colors that he is naming. And sort of describing a standardization of these colors. And you'll notice in this book, like, what color should that be? You can kind of tell it used to be orange, but because the pigments that were used in this book were not necessarily very color fast, it has just faded over the years. This was published in 1845. So theoretically, you know, there are oranges that survived from 1845, but he was not using them. So we have these sort of complementary colors, the primaries. And then in between the plates, he is describing more of the color names and how to make them. And he goes through the names of the colors in heraldry, which if you're familiar with the names of colors in heraldry, it's fascinating. There are some strange things going on in there. But I really like the combinations that he goes with, and even the sort of degradation of the pigment over time gives it this interesting sort of patina. And the Mercantile Library of New York was very interested in making sure that nobody ripped the plates out of this book while they held it in their collection. And if they did, that they would be able to trace them because they stamped every single color plate twice. Which, you know, I do understand. Like, I could see this framed on a wall. I would have this framed on my wall. Not necessarily the original one, but yeah, I mean, again, they're just very visually satisfying. There's something to be said for not just the importance of color theory here, but the organization of the colors on the page. So we get into kind of muted tones in the back, unfortunately. Got some sort of, I can't imagine how lovely these blues would have been before the whatever happened there. But I love the pastels. It's just a very pretty book. This was not by far the only color standards and nomenclature book that was published, as I mentioned. Another very famous one, we were talking about Darwin a little bit earlier and von Humboldt. Darwin actually used a copy of Werner's Nomenclature of Colors on his voyage of the Beagle to describe the colors of the animals that he was looking at. So Abram Gottlob Warner was actually a geologist, and he began to establish a standard nomenclature for stone colors. Patrick Syme, though, took this standard nomenclature. Syme was a flower painter, and enlarged it and added samples. So, get to it. It opens with whites, which are kind of difficult to see. But each of these samples is a little piece of paper that was painted by Syme or Syme's wife and cut up and glued into this book. So you can see next to each of the colors, all of these blues. So he has numbered them, he has named them, and he compares different animals' use of these colors. So we have the very creatively named grayish blue, which you can see on the back of the blue titmouse, or on the small fennel flower, or in iron earth. So he's using examples from nature to say, this is what this color is. And when Charles Darwin went to the Galapagos and started seeing all of these amazing tropical birds and all of these incredible plants, he wanted to make sure that when he brought home his records of his journey, that he was depicting these plants and animals as he saw them in life. In this period, the standard practice of naturalists was to kill the thing you're seeing and send it back to Europe. And from there, you can draw it from the sample. But that kind of resulted in awkward, horrible, stuffed creatures that don't really resemble how they were in life in any way, shape, or form. And it was quite another story for plants, which, as we know, wilt. The color of the flower might change in the journey back to Europe. So Darwin not only recorded notes on what he was seeing, made sketches, but was very careful to cross-reference everything he was writing with Werner's Nomenclature of Colors. The initial issue of Werner's was published in 1814, but it was the second edition published in 1821 that Darwin brought with him. Again, you can see the sort of degradation of some of these colors, and more so the paper. There's some foxing happening here. And yeah, I got these oranges. So there's Dutch orange, which you can see on the crest of the golden crested wren, or on the common marigold, or in a streak of red orpiment. And that is that color. And something to remember about these books is you are looking at them in a very subjective way through your computer screen. You know, some of you might have a Mac, some of you might be on PC, some of you might be on a tablet or an iPhone or something like that. And all of them will have different color resolution. Some of them are better at displaying color true to life. Some of them are not so good. It is a very important sort of aspect, as I'm sure many of you are aware, of design, to sort of calibrate your computer so both you and the artist, or you as the artist and your client, are both looking at the same thing. So that is why these samples here are all cut from the same pieces of paper. So each copy of the nomenclature of colors is using the exact same sample. It's not like this one was painted and then another one was painted and then they ran out of paint, so they had to mix some more. And then, you know, the next few didn't quite look the same. He really wanted it to be transmittable through time. That anybody could use this book. And if you described something as oil green, whoever you were talking to would be able to say, ah, yeah, oil green, this specific color. And animals have been described using these kinds of color nomenclature for a long time, really starting with nomenclature of colors, the Patrick Syme and Werner, but continuing through the 20th century. Robert Ridgway here was an ornithologist at the Smithsonian Natural History Museum, and he developed his own nomenclature of colors, in part because he needed more colors. He was an ornithologist, and many of you are familiar with how colorful birds can be. And there just simply were not enough colors in Syme. So this is the same kind of thing. It opens with descriptions of different colors, of like pansy purple and papillose and papula. This is in alphabetical order here. Peach blossom pink, sort of verbally described. But the important part is back here. So this is an early copy of Ridgway. Later copies employed the same method that Patrick Syme did, where he painted little samples of paper, well, huge pieces of paper, cut them into little samples, and then glued them into the book. In these earlier editions, these diagrams are all hand painted. So you do run into the issue sometimes of, I was running a little low on my red watercolor, so that's not exactly the color that I meant it to be. But this very quickly went into a second edition. It was very popular, particularly among naturalists and ornithologists. This became the standard work of color description for natural historians for decades, really into the 1980s. And you still see naturalists using this work. When I worked at the Smithsonian in 2017 or so, an ornithologist from upstairs, the library was downstairs, called us up and said, hey, can you bring us a copy of the first edition of Robert Ridgway? We need to compare it to a bluebird specimen that was collected in 1917 or something like that. And we're not sure if it's a mountain bluebird or a valley bluebird. And we'll be able to tell if we compare it to how the naturalist described that blue. And you can see like this royal purple, that's a gorgeous color. It's kind of coming out blue on my screen. But seeing these things in person is incredibly striking. So, you know, trying to tell the difference between an ultramarine blue and a cobalt blue. If you said ultramarine or cobalt to your sort of average individual, I don't think that they would be able to say, oh, well, this one's a little deeper. But with color nomenclature guides, that really allows anybody to understand the kinds of colors that you are describing. So Ridgway also included this very helpful diagram of a bird with all of the little parts of it labeled. So you can describe the tail feathers as being cerulean, and you can describe the rump as being cobalt. Just a quick reference for the field. Further descriptions of what the feathers look like, how to describe shapes on the feathers. So obviously Ridgway is very preoccupied with how this applies to ornithology. But botanists use this, mammalogists use this, geologists use this, botanists. It was really the standard until color photography became high tech enough that it could really capture the colors of these animals. I will just do a couple more because I know that I'm running a little short on time and I want you to be able to ask questions. This book is Album pour Images et Chromo. And it is what it says on the tin. It is an album of images and chromolithography. So this was assembled by an individual, and it contains thousands of examples of chromolithograph scraps. So a lot of these scraps were actually produced to go into books like this. These are not things that were cut out of magazines or are truly scraps. These are called scraps, but you would be able to buy them at the stationer and sort of break them apart. They were sort of hinged together by tiny little pieces of paper, and then glue them into a scrapbook like this. So the reason this is so colorful and the reason that a child could go to a stationer and buy a sheet of scrap is thanks to chromolithography. So I talked a little bit about chromolithography earlier, but it works on the principle that layering colors gives you more colors. And if you are familiar with Latin at all, you've probably guessed the technical definition of chromolithography, which is color stone writing. So unlike an engraving or an etching or a woodcut, chromolithography is done with stone, specifically highly polished limestone. And it is, I know that I am not the best at describing chromolithography because I am honestly a medievalist and chromolithography is a very new technology for me. But it's not necessarily an etching process. It is a chemical process by which the stone is left with areas that attract water and areas that repel water. So when you apply a sticky, oily printing ink to the stone, it will be attracted to the design and be repelled away from everything that is not a design. So this was a very efficient way of printing. And each of these would be printed with multiple different stones, which were divided by color. So there would be a blue, red, yellow, green, purple. These are fairly inexpensive examples, so there would not have been a whole bunch of stones. But chromolithographers like Prang, some of their more complex productions used up to 30 different stones. So 30 different layers of color. And these were very, very beautiful. The depth of color you could get with all of these stones, it really was very painterly, which was initially where chromolithography was most popular. If you remember the Christmas song, I can't remember which one, but it's a scene from Currier and Ives. Currier and Ives were chromolithographers, and they specialized in producing color prints that looked like paintings. Here we see a few little trade cards. So these would have been handed out by businesses to sort of attract customers. And this book is it's beautiful. Every single page has something incredible on it. I love these little girls who are dressed like flowers. She's on the back of a robin. It's your sort of high Victorian aesthetic. And that is really thanks to chromolithography. And finally, something that you all might be familiar with, a catalog of art supplies. So this was produced by Winsor and Newton, who is a very venerable art supplier. Some of you may even own art supplies from Winsor and Newton. So art supply catalogs are relatively new in the history of printing. They really came about in the 19th century, and really to cater to the artistic desires of the rapidly expanding middle class. Winsor and Newton began to diversify their stock. They didn't just carry oil paints or very high quality things anymore. They were producing everything, especially watercolors. Watercolors were kind of the art supply of the people. They used to be really used for sketching, for mapping out something that would become a final piece. But because you could take them outside and use them, they became very popular among your sort of non-professional artists, your hobby artists, or kids or young women who were well-to-do and could go on the grand tour. They would bring their little box of paints with them, and they would be able to paint what they saw. So they sold everything from those beautiful boxes to different kinds of watercolors in tubes, watercolors in cakes, boxes to put your watercolors in, all sorts of really interesting things for modest to not so modest prices, as well as samples of different kinds of inks. So you will notice some very vibrant colors here. This was published in 1895, around 1895. And Winsor and Newton were quick to embrace the chemical advances that made brighter colors possible. And they were fully aware of the toxicity of some of their inks and paints. For example, emerald green. Some of you might be familiar with emerald green. I am not going to touch it because it's made of arsenic. Emerald green is a beautiful color. It truly does look like emerald, but it is arsenical. And they knew that. There are other trade catalogs that we have here at Winterthur where emerald green is being sold on one page as a color and on the facing page as an insecticide. So this was not a mystery. Here's some different colors of mounting boards. But they had a competitor named George Field who has this great quote about arsenic and toxic colors. So he says, "Pigments are by no means to be sacrificed because they are poisonous. Instead, it would be well if artists would pay strict attention to cleanliness and avoid the practice, so common in watercolor painting, of putting the brush in the mouth." So just don't lick your watercolors and you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. It's not that much arsenic. Of course, we know better now. And arsenic is particularly damaging when it gets wet. So arsenical green watercolors, they atomize into arsine gas. When inhaled, it is very, very toxic. More so than just sort of sitting on the page here. You would have to eat this to really see any deleterious health effects, which is what Field was talking about. Like, as long as you don't lick your paintbrush with the arsenic on it, you're totally fine. Don't even worry. Buy more paints of ours. But that is really it from me in terms of this little tour. I hope that this was interesting to you. I know that it's not the same, not seeing these in person. But I do encourage you to, oh, I love the pastel crayons.
And Allie, while you're bringing that up, this is Jane. And isn't it true that University of Delaware has a database of poisonous books, so to
Yes.
speak?
Yeah, so watercolor is not the only place that arsenic green shows up. It also shows up on bookbindings. So in the 19th century, like I was saying, there were industrial advances that led to sort of chemical improvements. But there were also industrial advances that led to the improvement of textiles. So textiles became a lot stronger and they started being used as bookbindings. And to make the textiles look pretty, they were dyed various colors or pigment was applied to them. And one of those pigments was arsenic green. If you have a green book at home that is old, don't panic. It is probably not arsenical. This was really only used between around 1840 to around 1870. And it is a very specific kind of green. If you are suspicious of any of your books at home, it's okay if you have touched them, if you have had them sitting next to your other books, if you've had them on your table. Don't worry, don't like scour your table or anything. Like I said, this stuff is really only dangerous if A, you eat it, and hopefully you're not eating your books at home, or B, it gets wet. So it's just important to, like any book, store them in a sort of clean, dry area, and wash your hands after using a book that you might suspect is arsenical. If you're pretty ding dang sure that this is an arsenic book, you can put it in a gallon Ziploc bag. I know that this sounds not really intuitive, but putting it in the Ziploc bag prevents it from going through sort of humidity changes that might atomize the arsenic. And it also kind of reminds you like, ooh, there's something going on with this book and I shouldn't touch it. But I would like to emphasize that you are fine. Don't eat it. You're fine. But just a quick little intro to our Maker Creator Fellowship. Applications will open in November. These are 2 to 6 week research fellowships designed for artistic and creative professionals to really hang out at Winterthur and be inspired. It's not just the library, although we have lots of maker creators who come and use the library, for which we are very thankful. But you can also utilize the collections of the museum. You can use the gardens as inspiration. There is a deep history to these gardens that is fascinating. And just looking at all of the flowers that are blooming in the springtime or the fall colors. So you can see more about this information on the library website. If you go to winterthur.org, you can navigate to the fellowship page and sort of spend more time looking at this. It does require an application, but don't worry, it is not like super duper academic. You don't have to be a PhD to be a Maker Creator Fellow. There are also letters of recommendation. Again, it doesn't need to be your college professor. It can be a colleague. It can be someone who commissioned you to make something, just someone who can sort of write in your support. So we hope that a lot of you will apply to come visit us, because as I've said 300 times, this is just a snapshot of the gajillion amazing things that we have in the collection.
That's such a wonderful opportunity, Allie. And I know we're getting close to 1 o'clock. There was a question in the chat about how you determine the technical lighting aspects of your color exhibit. So I don't know if that's something you can answer quickly or we can follow up in email.
So I actually get to pass the buck because I am not in charge of that. Our conservators are. So we work very closely with our conservator colleagues to maintain a certain, it's called foot candle kind of lighting, so that way these books can be open and that they won't fade. Especially with this exhibit with so many colors on display, there was a lot of discussion if we needed rotations or if, the lighting that's in there is okay as it is. It just really depends. The cases, as you might have seen in the slideshow, pretty dim. So there's like this ceiling light along the top, but this is like a longer exposure, so it's actually not that bright. But we actually didn't have any rotations, which I was a little bit surprised about. It was up from September to January. So I think they like to have rotations every 4 or 5 months, and this was just kind of on the edge. But I am glad that I don't have to do math about this, that somebody else can.
I have one quick question before we go, but I'm always interested in contemporary color forecasting and color books. And I wondered, I mean, Winterthur collects historical, but are you aware of other universities, perhaps maintaining color forecasting materials and other types of color previews
Thank-
such as Pantone puts out.
I know that there was this really interesting color forecast or interesting like group of color forecast materials that went up for sale about a year ago. And it was mostly fashion and it was mostly, I think, the 80s. So it was just kind of outside, just a touch outside what we normally collect. But places like FIT,
Sure.
Rhode Island Art Institute, RISD, I can't remember what the one in Atlanta is called. The Georgia Institute of
Oh, the Savannah School of Art and Design. Is
That's the
that what you're
one.
thinking of?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. So I know RISD and FIT both have really solid collections. I think Savannah also does. UCLA has some as well. And MICA, the Maryland Institute of something. But
Something and
it's
something.
yeah, something and art. I'm not sure what the C stands for. But the sort of art colleges have good collections of these.
That's really good. To know, I think that, I'm always as a librarian thinking of like the next generation of collections. And so you kind of think
Mhm.
ahead to 50, 60 years from now, what will we be
Yeah.
collecting? I just want to thank you. I love the fact that you showed those chromolithography books. That brought me back to being a mother who always had to go to the sticker store. And I thought,
Oh my
those were a little
gosh.
bit like the precursor of that phase, and how interesting that botanists and naturalists use the color books to describe their materials. That's so
Mm.
great. Suzanne, I don't know if you have any closing comments, but I just want to say once again, Allie, thank you so much. And uh, Dorothy McHouston put a little note in our chat that we're having a PSBA picnic this Saturday in Tacoma. So we hope that some of you will be able to attend, and we have our color paper marble next week, which is a great follow-up. So Suzanne, if there's anything you want to say, otherwise we will thank Allie and thank Lori, and it's just been so great to see all of you.
Thank you for having me again. I'm so happy to be back. And let me know if you think of any other weird topics. I would be happy to talk on anything. We have a lot of pop-up books and movable books
Oh,
and
we
things.
love pop-ups and movables. Well,
Yeah.
excellent. Thank you so much. And
Thank
the
you.
Creator Maker Fellowship is such a wonderful gift to the community. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And enjoy your picnic.
Thank you.